if I could get them. We can't get them. That one came from the West Des Moines Police Department. It didn't come from the Des Moines Police Department. Well, you may look to the sky, but it really is a discourtesy to me. I am perfectly comfortable with what we did. And I feel very strongly that one of the main reasons that reaction came is because we as a society do not want to take drunken driving seriously. Not Roxanne, who takes it very seriously, but we don't want to take it seriously, partly because we know that many of us, that's the crime we could be accused of easily. And I mean, I know it's very difficult, and believe me, I was told everything from you did this because she's a woman, which, you know, to you did this because she's a Democrat. I mean, we do it, whatever we do because someone's a Jew, we do it because, really, that is not why we do it. And I understand you may differ with me, but you just have to take it, what I say, I'm not ashamed of having done it, and it wasn't a political act. Who else? Yes.
My question kind of goes to what before her. I too am involved in some of the media coverage of women, more so EMS than print journalism. But I noticed that during the campaign and so forth, and during Lonnie Lanier, there was so much emphasis put on Hillary Clinton's headband versus her scarf when she spoke to Congress, versus Lonnie Lanier as the hair lady, which Ted Koppel on Nightline said he referred to Lonnie Lanier as the hair lady on Nightline. And I really wonder why the media doesn't regulate itself a little bit better as far as that type of coverage. I understand that for human interest, the headband might be interesting, but why would someone run that when the first 5 minutes of a news broadcast were on the first or second page of their politics section in their paper? Do editors not, I don't know, think about this is coming from the white male editors, or I mean, where are we getting this from? That's my question.
Well, you know, I think the real inequity is that we do this with women and we don't do it with men. The implication being that women, you know, we care, when we look at a woman, we care about her hair. When we look at a man, we care about his brain. And that is clearly an inequity. My own opinion is not that the answer is to eradicate all evidence of what is a very real human interest in people's appearance, but rather to do it equitably. Now I think we ought to talk about it. Clinton, you know, loses weight or he wears different suits or something. People are interested in that. But it shouldn't dominate the coverage. And I do think it is a reflection of how we're kind of stuck as a society in looking at women and judging them more by appearance. And yeah, a lot of it is because white male editors are making the judgments, but it happens in my newspaper. I was standing somewhere talking to somebody and said, well, but you're in charge, so why does this happen? Well, you know, first of all, I make dumb judgments, which I'm sure many in the room would like to applaud for. And second, I don't make every decision. I mean, I'm not there making every decision all the time. And really, one of the most critical things now is that people be represented around the table every time a decision is made. People of color, women, in positions of responsibility, because it is really in those kind of informal councils that decisions like that reflect on you as a citizen and make you think, my God, you know, why aren't they taking this woman seriously, happen, and they destroy our credibility, and they also shape people's ideas. But you know, the media are no better than the society we're part of, and I'll guarantee you that the average coffee table conversation talked far more about Hillary's headbands than it talked about Bill Clinton's suits or about Lonnie Lanier's hair than it talked about the new civil rights nominee who's a black man and nobody knows what his hair looks like. And I don't say that, you know, I mean, I'm perfectly willing to say we really need to think about that. But I also would ask you, you know, are we reflecting what society does? And we got a lot of work to change that, and we can help change it. Yes?
A question of form, not substance. I've wondered this for years and never have had an answer. Every time I read the Register, I've wondered why the business section's on the backside of the sports page. And it's in a way trivial, but perhaps for women, you know.
No, it's an important question. Why is the business section on the back of the sports page? First of all, it used to be inside the sports section. I put it on the back because I thought it gave it more prominence. but that doesn't do away with the difficult question of if you live with a guy and he wants the sports section and you want the business section, what do you do? And in fact, we see the evidence of that. The women's readership, some of you in the room get a Register that does not have this piece of it, which is a sensitive question, so forgive me. But on Monday, the Register that goes to essentially central Iowa has something called Metro Business Tab, which is extremely well read by women. Now, some people think that's because believe me, I've been told that's because it's colorful or it's tab well, I think it's because you can get it, independently. But you will notice that on Monday, we don't have a separate local news section. There are only 4 sections available to us. And when we redesigned the newspaper in 91, we tried to figure out, okay, there's no question that sports and business being together is very inconvenient. The trouble is finding out what else is not just as inconvenient being together. And so we moved business out there to give it better prominence. In fact, if we ever get new presses, I think my grandchildren will enjoy them, but then we can have 5 sections, and then business will have its own, which clearly is what should happen. You could argue business ought to be out front. Actually, surprisingly enough, the sports section is significantly better read than business. And you do try to be somewhat responsive to your readers. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. What do we do to train beginning journalists? That's a good question. First, I should say that at the Register, the answer is that we generally don't hire people unless they've been a reporter somewhere else for several years, which doesn't mean that they're good or that they know their stuff. It also doesn't mean that they do their research first. And believe me, I know what you're talking about. In a sort of small bore way, I've had people interview me for national stories about something, and it's just amazing how dumb the questions are. I agree. I do know that this is true. We generally hire people who've got some experience somewhere, and then we certainly hope that they do some research beforehand. We give them handbooks. The best way journalists learn is by working with good editors day to day. You come to an editor with a story idea, and the editor says, okay, here are the kinds of things you need to look at beforehand, here are some of the questions you need to ask. And I think younger journalists really need that kind of training, and they don't get it in a very formal way, and the result is sometimes the kind of frustration you mentioned. I will say that even the best journalists are generalists, and they don't know the subject area, and the best journalists will admit ignorance and say, I need you to teach me this, because just as with teaching, that makes you really learn something in order to teach it. So does writing. You can't write something accessible to other people unless you really understand it. And that means they really need to listen to you, but before they come to you, they should have some basics, like who are you and how do you spell your name, and and I know it doesn't always happen. In fact, I would urge you, if you have experiences like that with people on my staff, to let me know, not because I want to punish them, but because we do need to look for places where we need to ask editors to work particularly closely with reporters. And I do know it happens. Yeah.
Do you think the trend in the 92 elections of a lot more public forums and like the one you described with Carol Simpson, regular people asking questions, and I think a lot more of that happened in 92. What do you think that portends for the future of electoral politics and specifically women in politics?
Well, that's an interesting question. What does that greater involvement on the part of citizens, public forums in presidential politics portend, especially for women? I do think it's something we will see more of because it worked, it was successful. And not just public forums, but candidates appearing on MTV, and talk shows. I mean, those are public forums, but they're also unorthodox routes of communication with people. I guess I don't have a particularly thoughtful response to how it will change politics, except I think it's an extremely hopeful sign. First of all, people care, and second, you really get lively results. My husband teaches government in high school, and our first time here, when precinct caucuses came around, it was just wonderful. I mean, you know, he has presidential candidates in his classroom all the time. And I would go sometime and listen, and the questions those kids asked were far more interesting than the questions my reporters were asking. And I think one of the things it portends is that people will see that when young people ask questions that are interesting, and when women ask, you know, I remember when this woman asked the question in the Carol Simpson forum, somebody said, oh, she doesn't really mean, there was a little bit of reaction, she doesn't really mean the recession, she means, you know, who gives a damn? The fact is, we know what she means, and she asked him a great question. It was a human question. So I think in some ways, women, you know, just asking these very direct questions, and instead of these, I am getting ready to show you what a smart person I am questions, will really give women you know, more visibility and make their voices better heard, because in public forums, women are sure a lot better represented than they are among political reporting staff still, or in sort of officialdom, you know, where candidates are showing themselves. So I think it can't help but be good, although it can also be real loose and diverse. I mean, it needs to be, you know, maybe we need to think carefully about how we do channel it and keep it effective. And I must say, I was thinking about this in regard to the earlier question about Lani Guinier. Part of what needs to happen is that political candidates need to be smart about realizing that that is a wonderful way to communicate. But you don't do that and then say, and you in the media, you know, be damned. I realize this sounds very arrogant because you think, well, you know, if they didn't need you, why do you want them to need you? The fact is, once you're in the White House, you do have to communicate effectively through the media. And Clinton was really dumb about the way he reacted when he got to the White House. Foolish things like closing off corridors for no apparent reason. It's just dumb, and I'm afraid that there are people in the media who are small enough to react by not reporting effectively. But more important, it wasn't easy to get access to him because he really did think, you know, hell, I got here by talking to people on MTV and, you know, Larry King, and I'll be damned if I need you now, and that's just a foolish illusion. So you need both. I hope. Yes.
Yeah. With most of the political reporters being male, what kind of an impact do you think that has on coverage of women in politics, particularly in campaigns?
Well, with most of the women political reporters being male, what kind of impact do I think that has on politics, and particularly campaigns? That's a very good question. I'll tell you one thing, I think we are getting an increasing number of not just some women political reporters, but very prominent women political reporters, and we're seeing the impact of their work, which has implications back toward what we know about men doing political reporting. And part of what the women do, now this is an interesting question, going back to this woman's point about hairstyles. Sometimes women political reporters do more of the human interest kind of stuff. Now this is an interesting point, but they do it about men as well as women. Maureen Dowd is the most famous example of this. Many of you in the room will know her work. She's a political reporter for the New York Times who is arguably the most brilliant political reporter writing today, but she really makes people mad. And the rap on Maureen Dowd is, boy, we are now losing all sense of objectivity. Now, I'm not ready to say, you know, there is no objectivity anyway, and therefore I don't. I understand that we value objectivity, or at least a groping for objectivity in the American media, and that the public rely on their being given as straight scoop as possible. But let's face facts. There is no pure objectivity. And when I was writing about national security issues, and I read Michael T. Gordon's reporting in the New York Times on Star Wars, I mean, it was pretty clear that if you went to other sources about Star Wars, they'd say, give me a break. I mean, what is it, science fiction? You know, this isn't going to make us safer, and it could increase the first strike risk. And instead, because we report on the people who are in power, I mean, we reflect the conventional wisdom. And the conventional wisdom, I think, wasn't real wise. It was kind of captivated by this really pretty idiotic idea that you knew wasn't going to go anywhere much, and it hasn't. I rest my case. But we took it seriously because it was what was in power. So sometime when people say that Maureen Dowd represents this loss of objectivity, I think what they're really saying is we're now hearing other perspectives. And when she covered, it was very controversial when she covered the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill hearings, because she really had a kind of, she gave a lot of sort of behind the scenes stuff and a lot of comments from both sides, and it was a different kind of sort of gritty and textured political reporting. So we're in transit about that now. There are more women political reporters, and I think I'm loath to say that women are more likely to do this kind of political reporting. I do think it's absolutely clear that women are more likely to take certain issues seriously. I mean, health issues about women, for example, that's an obvious thing. Rape, I mean, violence against women. But I also know that not all women political reporters, and unfortunately, it's back to my point about when you're pioneering, how do you do it and really be true to who you are. The unfortunate truth, and I've really observed some of this, is that often women political reporters, because they're in this tough dog-eat-dog world, and they're reporting to editors who are often former political reporters, and by God, they're going to prove they're just as tough as the guy, who went before them. So really, the real change won't come until the numbers are greater. Actually, there are men reporters now who are doing more interesting and more variegated political reporting, partly because, again, we are reflections of what goes on in society. I don't mean to eschew the opportunity to be readers, but really, journalists aren't readers. The editorial pages are a different function, but reporters are a reflection of what's going on in society. And one of the good things that's going on is that we really are taking women more seriously. But, the numbers who are taking women more seriously are not necessarily in the majority. Yes.
You keep saying that newspapers have to reflect the status quo of what's going on in society.
I don't say they have to, I say they do.
They do.
Right.
Okay, so there are media critics like, for example, Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn, and not that I agree with everything that they say, but they will criticize the media for precisely that problem that they would identify as reproducing the status quo.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you, could you reflect on how you think, what should we do to get an inspiring source for change if the media is reproducing dominant ideologies or racism or sexism or whatever's out there?
What should you do, or what should the media do? I mean,
Both of us.
well, if your
Yeah.
question is, are the media going to be the best way, a dramatic contributor to the way society changes, my own sense of disappointment is very real. Now, some media will be. Mass, mainstream media, very, very, I would say inevitably are a participant in the conventional thinking to an enormous degree. Now, I think we can make a difference. I would argue that we certainly have sought to make a difference on the editorial, but I'll tell you what, I'm castigated regularly for, kind of, well, why are you giving me all this feminist stuff? And why are you... We are, I think, making something of a difference on the editorial pages of the Des Moines Register, but it's a very incremental difference. And really, it needs to be. I've got no business. If I want to lead the banner of change with clarity and a sense of revolution, I shouldn't be in daily newspapering. That's not where I belong. I need to be the newspaper editor for all of Iowans who read the Des Moines Register. And I know it sounds like an excuse, but I am not going to be Noam Chomsky. And I think...
I'm not, blaming you in any way. I just want you to kind of reflect on what that might mean for the citizenry.
Right. Well, I tell you what I think it means. I think what we need to do is admit that what we are in the media is purveyors mostly of the conventional wisdom. I think people need to recognize that. But they don't. Think about the main criticisms of media. They're far too liberal. The people who react against the media, the main critics today, people like, Rush Limbaugh, who honors me by including me in his fold of feminazis, It's not, the fact is that there is this very narrow margin of where you change and bring people along with you. I think the main sources of change will be elsewhere. But we get them, ideally we get them better into the pages of the newspaper. I'll tell you one thing I really do think. One thing we can do better in the newspaper that is a service to all people is get the voices of more people into the paper. We did this forum, we do these Sunday forums every now and then, and we bring in people and just let them talk, and then we run it in the paper. We did one with young black men, and it was just great, and I've gotten so much reaction to it. Here's this kid who said, sometimes I get so discouraged because I'm walking along downtown and I'll see this woman lock her doors right in front of me, and I can't help it, I go up and go, ugh! And you read this and you think, boy, is that a human thing that this kid did? And here is a real relationship in a part of society where we don't have enough relationships. We don't get people of color into the paper enough. We don't get young people into the paper enough. And there we did it. That's not a revolutionary act. We ought to be doing that. We ought to be getting the voices of women who are staying at home into the paper better. We ought to be... So that is one thing I feel hopeful about. Although, again, people have to be ready and willing to do it. Again, I wish all of you would go out and say to yourselves and your friends and your sisters and your female cousins and we've got to have our voices be heard. I want more women's voices in the op-ed pages, but one place I think we can fault ourselves still is a sort of a Well, you know, who me? I mean, who am I to speak out? Well, I mean, who are we? We are here to speak out. Probably not this group saying that much. One more question, I'm told. My keeper tells me one more. Yes.
With the governor's race in our state, with the women running for governor, is there anything that you're doing or having your reporters do to be particularly sensitive to good balanced coverage and to keeping the dialogue away from is Iowa ready for a governor? Keep it on. Is there anything that you discussed in your meetings that you're going to be particularly sensitive towards doing?
Well, yeah, it's a real good question with a woman running for governor. I was here when Roxanne ran for governor. I know how Roxanne feels about David Yepsen, who's still our chief political writer. And I also know that it is very clear that, you know, I mean, when Elaine Baxter runs, when Bonnie Campbell runs, how society reacts to her is shaped powerfully by how we report on her. So in fact, I have quite specifically said, the main thing I think, I mean, I can't say, here are the rules. You never say anything about hair, you never say, you know, you never ask if, I mean, let's say Elaine Baxter announces and she says, one of the things she wants people to know is that she spent an enormous amount of her adult years staying home with her children. Well, you don't, you know, you have a rule beforehand that says, now when you're talking to women, don't talk about their children. I mean, that can't be it. I mean, there can't be any, you know, cut and dried stuff. So what I said was, we need to talk about this all the time. You need to talk to me, David, all the time, and, you know, Phoebe Howard needs to talk to Tom Fogarty all the time, and we need to be talking about this. So, and I'll tell you what else, I could really use input from thoughtful women such as yourselves, political activists from both parties, about it. And I won't always agree with you, just as we disagree on the Roxanne Conlon thing, but I surely value the input. And I won't shut it down, I promise, and it will be useful to me. And I think it'll be difficult. I think it'll be difficult, and not because we can't vote for a woman, that's horse manure, but because it is true that part of what goes on is a reflection of the reality of the campaign that we do have to report, but part of it is a reflection of what the reporter who's doing it thinks, you know. So I am surely aware of it. I'm sure that there will be some missteps, but I think I'm more aware of it than Jim Gannon was aware of it probably, you know, which is not necessarily saying a whole lot, and maybe that isn't even fair. I don't know. It won't be perfect. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.